Again, as I said, my name's Sherrill Munn. I am a master gardener here in Calvert County, Maryland, but this is not an official Calvert County Master Gardener program. So I'll be able to say some things that normally I wouldn't say, like maybe show a brand name or something, because, but this is an All Saints presentation, our what we're calling our skills extravaganza. And so I volunteered to show people how to plant potatoes in a grow bag, which we have right here. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But before we get to that, oh, by the way, I grow all of my potatoes now in grow bags rather than in the ground. And the reason is because a few years ago, I think it was in 2016, if I remember now, we started a gardening program at All Saints Church, and the purpose was to get teens, particularly teens, and later on we got children involved too, and adult volunteers that want to, but primarily our target was teens. But we tried to figure out, okay, how can we get teens interested in gardening? And so we came up with the idea, well, we'll have them watch the movie The Martian. Now, if you haven't seen the movie or read the book, in the movie, Matt Damon plays an astronaut that goes up with a team of astronauts to Mars, and he gets stranded on Mars. And so when they find out that he is still alive, they have to mount a rescue mission, but that's not going to get back to Mars till like 18 months to 2 years later. So he has to figure out how to survive. Now, they did build this big dome, an enviro dome, so that they could live. So teams, when they came up there, would have some place to live. So he could live in that. But the problem was food, because they did leave behind stores of what we would call like MREs today, meals ready to eat, those military meals. But he also, that would not last him the whole time. Well, they also brought up potatoes. And they brought up potatoes because they were going to spend Thanksgiving up there, and so they left some of these potatoes behind. Well, Matt Damon figured out how to take the sterile Martian soil and make it a viable soil that he could plant these potatoes in, and so he did. So he started raising potatoes, and he would raise some to eat and save some, of course, for seed for the next season, because he had to survive these up to 2 years. Well, so we showed this to the teens, and then each of the teens got one of these grow bags like this, and they had to plant potatoes. And we made our own soil, our own container soil, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And they had to plant the potatoes. They had to take care of it. They had to do it correctly. They had to take care of it and maintain it. And we taught them how to do that, but they had to do it. And at the end, and of course, potatoes will mature in about roughly 4 months. Then when they harvested those potatoes, if they grew potatoes, then they survived on Mars. If they failed, then they died on Mars. But fortunately, all of our teens survived on Mars. Everyone grew at least some potatoes. So anyway, that got me started. And now like I said, I plant 6 big grow bags over here that I will show you one later. And that's how I grow all my potatoes. Well, when we actually do the planting, it's only going to take about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes to do that. So there's some other things I want to tell you about container gardening and potatoes and so forth before we actually get to that I think hopefully you'll find interesting. And to start out with, I got into container gardening because of where we live here. We have a lot of shade, a lot of trees, and then we have some spots that are sunny. But some of those spots are places where you can't plant in the ground. I don't know whether you can see back there or not, probably not, but they're right behind us around our parking area here on the asphalt, and up our walkway here, they're containers. And the ones out here on the asphalt have peppers in them, pepper plants that I raise in the grow bags, sort of like these. And I do that because this is really a sunny spot and they need sun. So that's one of the things that's important about container gardening is you can use them to take advantage of the microclimate of your particular property, and every property has its own microclimate. That has to do with sun and shade spots. It has to do with slope. This is a hilly area too. That has to do with orientation of your house and the different points of the compass, because north side shadier, south side normally is sunnier. In my case, not so much because I got trees back there. So I get the sun mostly in the morning and in the afternoon, but midday there's a lot of, and I get it in different spots. That's the point. But anyway, containers let you take advantage of that and grow things according to what your microclimate allows you to do. Also, containers are really handy because you can move them. They're mobile. And that helps you even take care of the microclimate even more. They're also easier to maintain because they're easier to cover. For instance, if you get a frost threat, they're easier to maintain when it comes to pests and diseases because they're so contained. You know, they're not spread out over a large area. So anyway, they can be very convenient from that standpoint. Now, the other thing too, though, is I want to talk to you a little bit about the grow bag itself. This is a grow bag that they is really built, they say, for potatoes. It's about 15 inches in diameter and 16 inches deep. And for potatoes, you do want a deeper bag. I would say 14 inches minimum. That's what my larger ones are here, and they're 24 inches across. But this is made out of a material that's part natural material and part made from like plastic Coke bottles that have been recycled. What's really good about a grow bag is that not only it's light, when you empty them, they're easy to store, but also they drain slowly. So they drain, you don't have to put holes in them or anything. They naturally drain, but they drain slowly, which is very good. They also let oxygen in, they're porous. So they let oxygen through the walls, which is very good for plants because plants have to take up the oxygen they need from underground. And it has to go into the water in the little pores in the soil. And that's why you need moist soil. So there's water there in those little pores. And the other thing about it is because the oxygen diffuses in there through the walls, it does what's called root pruning. Now, root pruning means if you've ever had a plastic container and you've taken the plant out and the roots are all wrapped around and they become root bound, that's a problem. You have to put them in a bigger container and you have to cut those roots and loosen them up and everything. That doesn't happen in this because when the roots get too close to the side, the oxygen level gets to where the roots will quit growing. And then they send a message, a chemical message back for the plant to put out more roots. So what happens when you take a plant out of a container like this, you'll have a real bushy root system, and which is nice, so that you don't have to worry about having to repot that plant. So anyway, but this one is a good size. This is the size we use at the Sputnik garden, and we call it the Sputnik garden because it's a play on Sputnik, you know, the first orbiting satellite that the Russians put up. But at any rate, this one is very typical, and so this is what we're going to use. Now, let me say something about potatoes themselves. There's about almost 5,000 different varieties of potatoes in the world. Around 4,000 of those have some commercial value, actually. There's about 200 of those are wild potatoes. Potatoes came originally from Peru and northwest Bolivia in South America, and they spread down there, and they were used by the early man down there for about 10,000 years now. And but they spread to Chile and then throughout South America eventually, and up through Middle America as well. They did not make it to Europe until the 16th century, middle of the 16th century, when the Spanish conquistadors and so forth took potatoes back to Europe. North America actually got the potatoes from Europe. They brought, when the colonists came over, they brought potatoes from Europe, and that's how we wound up getting them in North America, interestingly enough. So, but potatoes they're healthy. They have good nutrition. They're high, particularly, and they're good with vitamin B's, particularly vitamin B6 and vitamin C. If you keep the skins on, if you peel them, then that nutritional value goes down. But there's also some interesting things you need to know about potatoes. When you plant potatoes, if you planted them in the ground, you do what's called hilling. You would dig a furrow that's about 7-8 inches deep, okay, and then you put the potatoes in the bottom of that, and sometimes if the potatoes, the seed potatoes are large, you would cut them up in about 2-inch chunks. And make sure that the eyes on them, the buds, are facing up, as many as possible. And then you cover them with about 3 or 4 inches of soil. And when they start growing, and you see the plants come up, as they grow up about 6 inches or so, you put more soil on them. And they keep growing, you put more soil on them. Every time they grow about 6 inches or so, till you've peaked up about above the soil, the ground level, about 8 inches around them. And the reason that you do that is two. One is the way potatoes grow. They call them a root crop, but potatoes don't grow on a root. The potato plant puts out roots, but they also put out a kind of branch. In fact, it's kind of like a limb. It is a limb. If it was above ground, it would be a limb with leaves on it, but it puts out a underground limb called a stolon, and on that stolon, it creates a tuber, and that tuber grows and becomes a potato. And so as you hill that, put the dirt up around it, more of those stolons are created, and so you produce more potatoes. Another reason they do that is because sometimes the potatoes will put out those stolons right up to the top, real close to the surface of the soil, and then when the tubers start growing, sometimes the tubers will protrude above the soil a little bit, like the back of the potato will be there. But when the sun hits that, it causes a chemical reaction, and it actually turns the skin of the potato a greenish color. When that happens, that potato is no good, and the reason is because potatoes are in the nightshade family, and you know that some of the nightshades are very poisonous. In fact, some of them are deadly poisonous. In the nightshade family also are tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and this alkaloid toxin that's in the nightshades. There's some in potatoes, tomatoes, and eggplants, not in the fruit, or not in the potatoes, unless the sun has hit that potato, and then the chemical reaction causes those alkaloids to develop. Now, what happens if you ate one? It wouldn't kill you, but it would certainly upset your stomach. You'd get nauseous and some other things that you wouldn't like. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to eat the green parts like the leaves or stems. You don't want to do that of any of the nightshades, the tomatoes or eggplants or whatever, because they have those alkaloids in them that would cause you intestinal problems. So that's another reason, though, that you hill the potatoes. Okay, so, but anyway, that's just a little bit about potatoes. And so what you're doing in a grow bag, you're essentially hilling the potatoes, because we'll talk about, when we start to plant, we'll talk about how you do that. All right. Now, let's get to the soil. Somebody asked before this started about soil. Container soil is not the same as soil in the ground or even raised bed soil or topsoil. Now I have an easy recipe for soil, for container soil. If you want to write it down, feel free to do so. And I'll give it to you. It's 1 part peat moss, or it can be coir. Coir, C-O-I-R, is made from the hulls of coconuts. But I use peat moss, and the reason is because peat moss is acidic. And particularly for potatoes, you want acidic soil, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So anyways, 1 part peat moss, it's 1 part compost. Now I use a leaf compost. I can either use my own, or if I buy a compost, it's usually Leaf Grow, which is a leaf compost made in Maryland, very good one. And then you want something to keep the soil loose, because in a container you want loose soil. You don't want soil that packs down heavily, and because if you do, when you water and so forth, it will pack down, and eventually it's not going to be able to drain well, and when it gets packed, the roots don't do well, and the plants simply won't do well. So it's important to have a container soil or container mix. So you have 1 part peat moss, you have 1 part compost, and then the 3rd part is something to keep that loose and fluffy, and I use either perlite or vermiculite. And now they also have rice hulls, but perlite and vermiculite are easier to find in your garden centers. If you mix those 3 in equal parts or near equal parts, you have a good container soil right there. Now you will have to fertilize it, and when you do that, you use a natural fertilizer. I use organic fertilizers when I can. Well, I just use them all the time anymore. But so if you can also add other amendments to that. Another thing that I sometimes add is a little bit of sand, because that helps keep it loose and drain well. You can add things like worm casting, and that adds additional nutrients, particularly micronutrients. But you don't need to. Just those 3 parts will make a container soil, and along with a fertilizer. Now, speaking of fertilizer, well, first let me talk about pH. You know, the pH is whether the soil is alkaline or whether it's acidic, and it runs from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral, right in the middle. Potatoes like it on the acidic side. In fact, they do best when the pH is 4.5 to 5.5, but particularly you want it to be below 6, because you get 6 and above, potatoes, one of the problems with potatoes, they can get what's called a scab, and that really looks bad, and if it gets bad enough, then the potato really isn't very good to eat. So you avoid that by keeping the pH below 6. Now, with that container mix, and with the base being peat moss, the one I told you, you're going to have a pH below 6, so you're going to have an acidic pH. If you buy soil in a commercial soil, be really careful when you do it, because this is a good one for potatoes, because it is not pH adjusted. If you look on bags, sometimes the commercial bags, it'll say it's pH adjusted. That means it's adjusted up to 6 or above, because most garden plants like the pH between 6 and 7. Okay, and so if it's pH adjusted, it'll be above that. Now, you can still use it, but if you do, you'll have to add something like this, which is a soil acidifier. And so you'd have to add a couple of tablespoons of this to bring that pH level back down if you use one that's been adjusted. So it can still be done, but it just takes a little bit more effort. Okay, so much for pH. Now, the other thing is fertilizer. Potato is a root crop. Even though a potato doesn't grow on a root, it's still called a root crop because it develops underground. And root crops like phosphorus. They need phosphorus because phosphorus helps roots to grow, and it helps stems to grow. It does a lot of things, but it particularly helps to initially grow strong root systems that help the plant to grow quickly and to be a good, strong plant. So you want a little bit higher in potassium. You want higher potassium than you do nitrogen. And if you look on, on a fertilizer container, you'll see the NPK percentages. The N is for nitrogen, the P phosphorus, the K for kalium, which is potassium. Okay, and so what you want is a slightly higher amount of phosphorus than you do nitrogen. And I use one, and let's see, what did I do with it? I don't have it with me here, but nevertheless, I can tell you what it is. It is the nitrogen level is 3, the phosphorus level is 4, and the potassium level is 3. So again, it's slightly higher. Now there is another commercial one here I do have. This bag, it's an organic fertilizer, and it has 4. If you look on here, it tells you what the levels are of the percentages. And so the nitrogen level is 3, the phosphorus level 4, and the potassium level 4. That's not bad either, because that potassium level is higher. So that's what you want to look for. Okay, moving on here. Now, we've quickly covered several things. We've gotten to the point now where I think we can actually plant the potatoes. Okay, so we take our grow bag. Now, the way you do this, first of all, you want to put soil, the container soil. Well, let me go back to that too. If you do get a commercial, if you go buy a commercial potting mix, you want it to say on the bag, container soil, container mix, potting soil, potting mix. Don't let it say garden soil, topsoil, anything like that. That will be too dense. Okay. So anyway, we have right here a container soil, a potting soil. All right. This is a commercial one. This one is not pH adjusted. That's why I like to use it if I'm using a commercial one and not making my own. Tonight I'm not making my own, and it'd take too long. So anyway, but you dump, first thing you do is you simply dump 4 inches of the potting mix in the bottom of this. Now, Marianne, I want to have Marianne come up here and stabilize this for me, because we're going to put some soil in there. This soil was a little bit wet, so that's why I wanted to be careful that I didn't knock over the container. Okay, now I've got some in there. If I've got too much, I can take some out. But how do I know I've got 4 inches of soil in there? Well, it's I have a lot of really high-tech equipment I use in gardening, and this is one of them. This is a dowel, and I've measured 4 inches here, and I've drawn a line around it. Okay, if I put that in there and it comes up to close to that line, I mean, it doesn't have to be right on it, little above, little below is okay. This isn't rocket science. Then it's good, and lo and behold, it's good. It came up within probably 1/8 of an inch of that line. So I have 4 inches of soil in the bottom of this bag. Now that's all you're going to put in right now. Now, fertilizing. I'm going to use this commercial fertilizer that I showed you, because I don't know where the other one is right now. And the fertilizer bags will tell you how much to use, but a lot of times they'll tell you how much to use according to how much the diameter of the bag is. And sometimes they'll tell you how much to use on 100 square feet. And so sometimes you have to use a little math to figure this out. Well, I did. So I found out that for this amount of soil in this bag, we probably need to use about 2.5 tablespoons of fertilizer. So that's what I'm putting in here. Okay, now once you put the fertilizer in, then, and I used just a regular measuring spoon here. Also have these little cups like that work. Then you just mix it in. And just mix it in real thoroughly. And that's all you need to do there. And then smooth it back out and level it. So you have your 4 inches again. And then it's time to actually put the potatoes in the bag. So I have some nice potatoes here. These happen to be Yukon Golds. Now I don't plant the big russets, okay? We don't need that. I don't plant the big russets. Those are the large basic baking potatoes. I suppose you could, but you'd probably have to cut them up. But I plant the whole potato, seed potato. And these, like I said, these are Yukon Golds that I happen to have now. I plant different kinds. I plant red potatoes, blue potatoes, and white potatoes. I plant a lot of fingerling types because they do really well in bags. But so we're going to plant Yukon Golds. Now notice, if you can see this, there are sprouts starting on this, buds. Those are the growth buds where the branches are going to start growing up. Okay, and also roots start growing out. And the potato itself gives them the energy to get started on that. So we place these down just on top of the soil. Don't bury them down in the soil. Okay, I'll pick out, here's another good one with a good top knot there started. And I start by planting them opposite each other. You want to keep them separated, but you can plant up to 5 seed potatoes in this bag. They advertise on this that you can plant anywhere from 3 to 5. And what we've done at the church, usually in the Spudnik garden, is we plant 4, but I think I'm going to plant 5, see how it does. And here's another one. This one's a little bit shriveled, so I don't like that too well. I would plant it if it's the only one I had, but I'm going to see if I can find a better one, and here's a better one. Okay. So we place that in there, and that's 4, and then I'm going to put the 5th one right here in the middle. Now, the camera's going to move a little bit because we're going to bring it over and show you what this looks like. And so you can see how they're separated somewhat in the bag, and you can see the depth of the soil. And so we keep them separated about like that. Okay. And you can see there's the bag, and this is a 16-inch depth bag. So, and we put 4 inches in it. Okay, so we still have a foot up here to go. Now, what do we do next? Well, next, put about 3 inches of soil on top of these potatoes. Okay, so I'm going to open this bag. Okay, now this bag is somewhat heavy, so I'm going to have to put this down and then pour the soil in, and then I'll get it back up to you, okay? So hang on just a second. The reason it's heavy is because it got a little bit wet. Okay, so now how do I know I've got 3 inches of soil on top of those potatoes? Well, I go back to my high-tech instrument here, my stick, and I probe around till I find a potato, and I go down to, and then I take a look at it. If it's about 1 inch below that 4-inch line, then that would be 3 inches, right? Well, see how difficult this is, and how high tech and scientific it is. but I'm going to have to put a little more because it was a little light. Okay, I'm thinking that looks like that's going to be just about right. But just to be sure, use my instrument here. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now you also, that's new soil, a little bit of fertilizer. Now you're not putting quite as much fertilizer on, so just a couple of tablespoons of it, since you don't have quite as much soil. Okay, so we'll rub that in. I'm just going to rub it in with my gloved hand this time to save some time. All right. Now, these potatoes are planted. That's all there is to it to plant them, but to begin with. But that's not all there is to it. Yes, leaking some water out. Okay. That's okay. So at any rate, they're ready to go. Now, what do? Well, you set it to wherever you want to set it to grow, and then you let them grow. And what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing the plants come up. You know, they'll start breaking through the soil. You'll see them push the soil up, and then they'll break through. And once they do, they'll start putting out little green leaves. And then once they put out those green leaves, and the photosynthesis stuff starts, they grow quickly, okay? And when they grow up about, I'll say 6 inches or so, 6 to 8 inches, you add more soil. And you add about another 4 inches or so of soil because you want to leave about 2 inches of the leaves above to keep the photosynthesis going. But you can bury the leaves and everything up to that 2 inches, and it will put out more of the stolon along that stem. Then once it grows up another 4 inches or so, or 6 to 8 inches, I should say, you'll put another about 4 or 5 inches of soil in there, maybe 6, depending on how much they grow, leaving those 2 inches of leaves up above. And you want to do that till you get up about, an inch or so, inch and a half inch from the top, and you want to leave that for like a water reservoir. And once you've done that, then you let them go. Just let them grow. You're done as far as the bag is concerned. Now, they won't all grow at the same height at the same time, so you're going to have to put some dirt in and around one part of them and leave another one till it gets a little taller, and then put some more in. And every time you do that, you also add a little bit more fertilizer, another couple of tablespoons of that fertilizer. If you're adding soil acidifier, then you probably need to put another tablespoon of the soil acidifier as you do that each time that you add the soil. Now, once you're done, you set it aside, okay, and let it grow. Now, here's what, if Marianne's going to bring the camera over, this will wiggle a little bit, but stay with us. We'll show you what they look like once it's done and they're growing. Okay, this is one of my potato plants in a potato bag. I use a larger size. This is 14 inches deep and 24 inches across. This one you can put up to 10 potato sets in, or seed potatoes in. But I only have 6 of these, but we raise plenty of potatoes with those 6 bags. But this is a nice, healthy plant. This is what they're supposed to look like as they grow. And when did you plant them? Okay, and this is about probably 5 weeks of growth. Just to let you know how they grow. This has been a great year for some reason. The potatoes have loved it, and they've really gone to town. So now you have to water it after each. Yeah. I'm not normally once I planted these, I would water them in, but this soil is already wet, and you want to be careful about how much watering you do, because you want it moist but not wet, not drenched. And because if you get it too wet, you can rot the potatoes, but potatoes do like it moist. They don't like it dry either. So now, how do you know when to water? Well, again, this is very scientific, and I use another very sophisticated scientific instrument. I take my finger
Without the glove.
without the glove. I have gloves on now so I won't mess myself up, but without the glove, and I stick my finger in the soil up to just above the second knuckle. If I feel moisture, I don't water. If it feels dry, that whole length, time to water, and I'll water. Okay, and now some people ask, well, how many times a week should you water? I don't know. It depends. Depends on how much it rains, you know, and that sort of thing. So, but when you do water it thoroughly, but then don't keep watering it every day. Don't water it until it needs watering again, because like I said, you want to keep it moist, not wet. Okay, so now what? Once you're growing, you got this really good healthy plant. How do you know when to harvest? Well, there's two harvest times. One of them is, do you want new potatoes? You know, the little immature ones that are really very good, green potatoes, that kind of thing. Anyway, what you do to get the new potatoes is you wait till the potatoes bloom, and the potatoes have nice, pretty blooms on them. And once they bloomed, about 2 weeks after they bloomed, you can dig down carefully around in there and find those little potatoes and harvest a few of them. You know, go from plant to plant and harvest a few of them if you want, and you'll have some new potatoes. Okay. Now, if you can harvest them all and have all new potatoes, but most people like to have mature potatoes, so then you let the rest of them mature. I let them all mature. We haven't really harvested new potatoes. We let them mature. But how do you know when they're mature and you can harvest them? Well, that's where potatoes are really helpful, because they help you to know. You don't have to worry. It takes roughly 4 months, depends on the type of potato, for it to mature, but it will tell you when it's time. Because what happens, the leaves, they'll get up about 2 feet tall, and then all of a sudden, one day, it won't be all of a sudden, it'll be a few months down the road, but they'll start turning yellow. And they'll continue to turn yellow. And they'll continue to yellow, and then they'll start falling over. And then they'll start turning brown. And when they have done that, fallen over and started turning brown, you wait about a week or two, and then you harvest them. Simple as that. They tell you when it's time to harvest. Now, the great thing about a container, how do you harvest? Well, you don't have to have a potato fork or anything, go out in the field and dig down and try to find them all. I have a wheelbarrow. It's right in front of us here because the computer's sitting on it. But you just take the bag, you dump it in the wheelbarrow, you dig through, get all the potatoes out, and then you have all that nice dirt that's left. And you can put them back in the bag if you want and plant something else in it. You can put a succession planting for the fall if you wish. Or you can use that around in other places in the garden and yard, or it can compost. You can actually compost that soil and use it then as compost like next year. So anyway, that's how you plant potatoes and grow them in a grow bag. Now, that's not all of it. Let me just say, too, you have to take care of it. And we've talked a little bit about the watering. Also, it would be good to fertilize one more time just before they start to bloom. Let me say also, and then you don't need to fertilize after that. But when they bloom, they do create a little fruit on there, and they look like little green tomatoes, like little green cherry tomatoes. Do not eat those fruits. Start with, they're full of seeds and don't taste very good. But secondly, they're also full of that alkaloid toxin that's going to rip you up inside. So you don't want to do that. But anyway, there's pests you have to worry about. There are diseases that you have to worry about. The most common one probably is going to be early blight, and that you'll see it because you'll start getting these spots on the leaves that are yellow around the edge of the spots with kind of brownish in the middle. And potatoes can usually survive that unless it just gets really severely infected. And I'll talk in a minute about how you can help prevent or slow that down, or help the potato at least to live through it. The really bad one, and the one that caused the Irish potato failure, back in the 19th century, is late blight, and it's still around. And the problem with late blight, the way you know it, you start seeing dark spots get on the stems and the leaves and so forth, and they can look kind of moist like, and it will get progressively worse. It also gets into the roots and into the tubers, the potatoes themselves, and it kills the plant. And once it's got that, there's nothing you can do about it except, and this is true if it gets into tomatoes or anything, you get rid of that plant and you put it in a bag. You don't just go bury it someplace, because then you're burying the spores in the soil. You put it in a bag, like a contractor trash bag or something, and it goes to the landfill. And you get rid of it and get it out of there, because it will spread to other plants, and once it does, that plant is doomed. Okay, so that's a bad one. Fortunately, don't see that very much. I've never seen it here. And hopefully I never will. But and there's some others. Powdery mildew is one, and that's just looks like a white, literally like a white powder on the leaves and so forth, and that can destroy the leaves over time. And there's others, but I won't take the time to talk all about those. But there's some things you can do about it. First of all, before anything shows up, like I'm going to start spraying these now, as big as they are. And there's several things that you can use to spray them. If you are doing organic garden, you can use a copper fungicide or a sulfur-based fungicide. You can also use neem oil, and that helps to prevent the diseases coming on. Some of them, it'll help prevent powdery mildew. It will help prevent the early blight. It'll help prevent late blight, and hopefully it does prevent it. Now, one of the things that's good to do is not just spray every time. And then once you're spraying, you want to spray about every 10 days or so to 2 weeks, okay? And keep doing that. But it's really good to spray maybe one time with a copper, one time with a sulfur, another time with neem oil, because that helps to prevent these funguses from adapting, because they mutate and adapt, and that helps to prevent that from happening. There's some other good fungicides that aren't for organic, but they're good, and they're not dangerous or anything. But I'm just talking about organic ones right now. Okay, in terms of other pests, insects. The number one that you probably heard about is Colorado potato bug, and boy, they can go. The beetle and the nymph can go through your potatoes and strip the leaves. If you get a real infestation, they can kill the plants. Fortunately, in container gardening, that's pretty easy. You can go look for them. You find that they lay their eggs underneath the leaves, little brown clusters, and then they that little humpback beetle looks kind of like a mini Volkswagen with stripes. Well, that's your potato beetle, and you can knock those off. One of the ways of doing it is you get a little bucket with soapy water in it and just knock them in there, and that soapy water will kill them. So it's easy to kind of pick them off. If you get a more serious kind of infestation, you can use, well, in fact, you can use some stuff ahead of time to prevent it. One of them that I really like is spinosad, and it's got several different bacteria in it, bacillia in it, and these particular bacteria that has in it put off chemicals that are toxic to the insects or the caterpillars or the nymphs that will eat the plant. So if they bite into the plant, they get that into them, and they get sick, they stop eating, and it kills them. Not harmful to good insects. It's a really good thing, and not harmful to people. It's a really good thing. It's good for organic gardening. So that's another. Another one is BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis, I believe is what it is, and it's similar to the spinosad. Now, if you spray those ahead, well, if you spray them when they're on there, it'll help to kill them, but it doesn't kill them on contacts when they eat. So if you do it ahead of time and then they get on there and they drop dead. And there's some neem oil also helps to kill the insects that get on there. Others are things like mites and aphids and thrips and so forth, but the neem oil will wipe those out. They also can get root nematodes. Now, that's the great thing about container gardening. This soil is going to be clean. You're not going to have any nematodes or anything like that in there. And so you don't really have to worry about that. You may have to worry about it if you plant it in the ground, okay? But, and about all you can do with that is rotate the crops if you get nematode in the ground in your plants. Okay, so anyway, let's see, is there anything else? I think I have touched on, the other thing, Marianne reminded me, one other thing you need to do is when you do harvest your potatoes, do a taste test. Go buy some potatoes, similar potatoes at the grocery store. For instance, these are Yukon Golds. Go buy some Yukon Golds at the grocery store, and then take the ones that you've newly harvested, cook them in the same way in separate pans and do a taste test. We've done this each year with the teens at the Spudnik Garden at the church. And every year they do a blind tasting. Every time they have chosen that the best tasting ones are the ones that they raise. And that's because, like all other vegetables, very fresh potatoes that haven't been in storage and set, transported and so forth, just taste better. So try that. Anyway, that is how you plant and raise potatoes in a grow bag. So I will stop there and ask if there are any questions, comments that you may have. So if you can unmute.
I have a question, Martha. When we planted potatoes, we always cut the potato up and left a little eye.
Yeah.
Would you do that with the container, and do you need a special potato?
No.
Potato.
You can grow virtually any kind of potato. The only ones I haven't grown, I said earlier, are the big russets, the kind that you use for baked potatoes. But I don't know why they couldn't grow. I just haven't done it because I really like the fingerlings and some of the other types. But yes, you can do that. If you, for instance, on these, there was one in there that had on each end, it had buds coming off of it.
Yeah.
You can cut that in half and plant each half of it. If you're cutting them up, you want at least a 2-inch chunk. You know, it does need the potato, needs the energy from that. You also don't want to plant it immediately after you cut it. Give it 24 to 48 hours and it'll heal itself over, and that'll help prevent it from rotting. Yeah, and sometimes you can get away with using some out of the stores and sometimes you can't. Because some of the potatoes that are in the stores are sprayed with a retardant to keep them from sprouting.
Keep them from sprouting.
So I wouldn't advise using them from the stores, although sometimes you get them and they sprout, and if they do sprout, then I don't know why they wouldn't grow.
Do you save yours to plant them?
No.
Or do you buy them new?
Yeah, I always get the seed potatoes are really inexpensive, so I just buy them new.
Yeah.
And by the way, that raises something. Is it too late to plant them? No, we just did. These will grow. And the last time I was down at Wentworth Nursery, they still had some seed potatoes left, and that was a week ago. In fact, that's where I got these.
Okay.
And so if you, if you hustle down there and you want to do that, you can probably still get some seed potatoes from them.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can actually plant potatoes in the middle of summer for a fall harvest if you want.
Oh, good to know.
The problem is getting the seed potatoes there.
Yeah.
You can do it. And what you can do is when you harvest, if you want to do that, take a few of the potatoes and do what you said, cut them with the eyes, the buds on each piece, and replant those for a fall harvest. So you can do that. I saw a hand.
I have two questions.
Yes.
One, it's Carol. I was wondering, when you do have that disease that you have to take the potatoes to the dump,
Yeah, that's the late.
what happens to the bag? Is the bag contaminated?
Oh, good question.
The bag is contaminated too. The soil is contaminated. Everything is contaminated.
So the whole shamil.
Take the whole bit.
Get
Okay.
rid of, I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but you want to get rid of the whole smear.
Mhm,
And get
mhm.
rid of the bag, the soil, the plant, everything.
No, that's what I was thinking.
You don't want any of those spores around.
That's a good question.
And the other thing too, though, you can, there is a way, when you can reuse these bags from season to season. So you dump out the dirt, but you also, the best thing to do is when you do that is to cleanse them. And you can do that with like a 10% bleach solution. I have a big tub, and what I do is I fill that tub with water, or make a 10% bleach solution in that water, and then I just dunk these in there and soak them good. It doesn't take long, and that will kill bacteria, viruses. It also will kill funguses and so forth that are in there, so you can cleanse the bag so it'll have a fresh start the next year.
Thank you. The other question I had, can you plant sweet potatoes?
I just did this year for the first time to see what happens. Yeah,
Well, you did a few years ago.
No, what I am not
in
in
bag.
bag.
Oh, not in bag.
What I am told and what I've read is yes, you can, and you want probably a wider bag.
Yep.
These that I have down here with these other potatoes that are mine that are 24 inches across, I think would probably
The 24-inch.
Yeah, they'd probably be ideal for that because they're vining. They don't grow up like this. They vine, and so they're going to run. And you don't want to put them someplace where they're going to run. All of that. But the interesting thing is, you can also use those as a decorative plant because sweet potato vines are pretty.
Oh, beautiful plants.
Yeah. So you can put them someplace where, while they're growing, they're a
Decorative.
decorative plant for you, and then at harvest time, you harvest them. So they'll do double duty for you. But yeah, I planted some for the first time this year in grow bags, and we planted some in the Spudnik garden, and I planted some here at the house too. I did one bag here at the house as an experiment. The others went into my raised beds, but we'll see what happens. But yes, I've told you, and I've read that they do well in bags.
Okay, it was a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much.
It's Sue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, what is the name of the soil that you buy, the commercial soil that you buy?
Okay, now if this was an official Master Gardener presentation, I can tell you.
I know.
Yeah, but the one that I like is a commercial for potatoes. Now, only for the potatoes. I buy I buy other stuff for other things, but the reason is the Shenandoah, made in West Virginia. You can get it at Wentworth. You can get it at most garden centers, but it's called Shenandoah. Now, Shenandoah has a topsoil, and they have a potting soil. You want to make sure you get the potting soil. And again, it's not it's peat moss based, so it'll be acidic, and it's not pH modified. So it will be so you don't really need to add soil acidifier. You might want to add a little bit of soil acidifier if you want to, because potatoes really like it down around 4.5 to 5.5. And I tested some of this once, and it's more like 5.6 to 5.8, but which is fine. It's below 6, and that's what you want.
Okay, and what about the spray that you use? Spiticide, how do you spell that?
Spinosad is that's the insect spray. It's SPINOSAD. Spinosad, and the other one is BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis or something like that. But you'll see it just as BT. Either one of those, they essentially do the same thing. It's just that the Spinosad has a broader spectrum and will kill more different kinds of insects and caterpillars and so forth than the BT will.
Sherrill,
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sherrill, this is Kip. The
Potatoes
bags
do you get from one plant? How many potatoes?
Well, that depends on a lot of things. It depends on the variety of potato. It depends on how well you take care of them. It depends on, whether they get hit by disease or whatever. But on average, probably around 3-4 pounds per bag, and maybe more. They say that these bags can raise up to 6 pounds. I've never gotten quite that much out of them. Now the bigger bags that I use, you can get up to, they say you can get up to 10 pounds, but I get more like 6 to 8 on those. But it just, it depends on factors, but I would say a range, you can get maybe in these 3 to 5 pounds, and in the bigger ones, like 6 to 8.
Now, after we do the harvesting, we let them dry too.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to put them for storage over the winter or the fall where they're damp.
Well, yeah, let me talk about storage
Yeah.
on them. I'll talk about it
Okay.
a little bit. Thank you. Yeah, storage, first of all, you don't want to clean them off and wash them before you store them. You just rub the dirt off, and whatever dirt's left on them, you leave it. And you want to store them in a cool, dark place. You don't want a lot of light on them, because if they turn that green color and get that alkaloid going, they're not going to be any good. So you want them in a cool, dark place, and they'll store longest at around 45 to 55 degrees. So say 50 degrees. But if you don't have a place that's that cool, as cool as you can have, that's a dark place, and they just won't last quite as long, but they'll still last quite a while.
Yeah, but also what I do with them is I save egg cartons. So especially the ones that are cardboard, not the plastic ones. You have 12 little containers there. So I put the potatoes in those little openings, and then I have them open. So I've got 2 layers.
Good idea.
And I stack them so they're down in the basement, and that way they keep separated.
Yeah, they stay separated, and you get good air circulation and so forth. So less bad things happen. So yeah, anything else?
I have
Sherrill,
another question.
online, the bags seem to be sized by number of gallons, like a 10-gallon bag,
Yeah.
15-gallon. Is that what gallon bag is that?
This one's about a 15-gallon bag right here. Okay. Now you can figure it out if you know how to do the volume and so forth of a cylinder. But this one's about, and yes, they're advertised like that, and they'll tell you. Let me tell you something else, though, that you raise a good point. When you go in to if you're going to go in and get some potting soil, it's not going to be in gallons, it's going to be in cubic feet. So how do you translate gallons to cubic feet? Well, 8 dry gallons equals 1 cubic foot. Okay, so this particular bag, once you do the math on it, actually it's about a 15-gallon. It holds about 1 3/4 bags or cubic feet of potting soil. So you would need 2 of the 1 cubic foot bags to finish the entirety of your planting cycle with the potatoes. You're still going to have a little left over, but that's okay. But anyway, but that's a good question, because that's always a frustration. You go in and you say,
Yeah.
you got a 20-gallon bag here. Well, but how many cubic feet will go into? So 16-gallon bag will take 2 cubic feet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So a 20-gallon, 2.5 cubic feet. Other questions?
Would the bag be comparable to a hill of potatoes?
Yes, what you're doing here is it's the same thing essentially as hilling potatoes in the ground.
Okay.
As it grows, you're adding more soil, and that's just like hilling.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're really hilling in the bag.
Because you have to cultivate your hills, so you're cultivating when you add more soil.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. You're cultivating when you add more soil and you add a little bit more fertilizer. Yes,
Yeah.
I see the hand.
Yeah, when you spray your plants, do you just spray the tops of them or do you actually go under
No,
and spray the bottoms of the leaves?
I go under them. I try to get it all, because a lot of times the nymphs or the eggs and some of the insects will be under the leaves. They always lay their eggs almost always under the leaves. So and the neem oil, for instance, will kill the eggs as well. It'll smother the eggs. But you you want to try to get under as well if you can, as much as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What was the third part to the mixture for the soil? Peat
Okay,
moss,
the mixture.
compost, and
The third part is a perlite or a vermiculite. You can get these at garden centers, and it's just they're organic. They're made from volcanic pumice. The difference is vermiculite can help store water. Perlite does not. But both of them keep the soil light. But like I said, you can also now use what they call rice hulls, and that's just the holes, literally the holes off of rice, and that does the same thing as far as keeping the soil lighter so it doesn't compact in the container. And but yeah, so it's peat moss or coir, but peat moss for potatoes, the compost, and then the perlite or vermiculite. Those three in equal parts. And if you get one of the ways, compost, or excuse me, peat moss usually comes in 3.8 cubic foot bags. I mean, you can get it in smaller bags than that, but let's say you get that bag. Well, then you're going to take, you really want 3 of the bags of the compost if you're getting it in bags from it, because that will be, they come in 1.5 cubic foot bags, and so that will give you close to that. They'll give you about 4 cubic feet, which is close to what, and if it's a little bit off, it doesn't matter. And then you can get 4 cubic foot bags of the perlite or the vermiculite, and then you just mix that all together. Now, one of the ways I do that is at the church, way we do it is we put a big tarp down on the ground, put that stuff all in there, and just mix it all up good, and then put it in the containers. But that recipe that I gave you with those dimensions of the 3.8 cubic feet, the 3 bags of leaf grow that are 1.5 cubic feet, and the 4 cubic foot of vermiculite or perlite, that will fill 10 8-gallon bags. So, like 5 16-gallon bags like this one. And that just gives you some idea of how much you would need. So if you wanted to plant 5 of these, that mixture that I just gave you with those quantities would do that, would fill this. But remember, that is not a fertilized container mix. You do have to then put fertilizer in. And you do that according to what the directions are on the fertilizer bags. And that's going to require you probably to do a little math. I hate to say.
Well, if you use the potting soil, does that have fertilizer in it?
Some of them do. But you have to be careful with that, because usually, several of them do. But you have to be careful. Look at the fertilizer mix, because most of them have more nitrogen than they do phosphorus. Now, if you plant potatoes in a high phosphorus fertilizer, you're going to get a lot of beautiful leaves, but you're not going to get much in the way of potatoes.
Oh,
Without that phosphorus. So if you can use that, as I said earlier, but you're going to have to modify it by adding phosphorus. And one of the ways of doing that, I do have this, is you can add rock phosphate. And this is a natural phosphate, and it has it's 3% phosphate and 1% iron. Okay, and iron is something that plants need as well. There's a lot of micronutrients that plants need, but so you can add that. Again, you have to look at the quantities that you would use in a bag like this. I probably would use maybe 3 tablespoons, something like that. So, because you don't want to get too much of it in there, but that would you want to modify it so you have a higher level of phosphorus than you do nitrogen. Any other questions? Okay, well,
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
oh, that's quite all right.
Night.
I enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much for being here.
And
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and next week,
it's John, isn't it?
yeah, no, who's on for next week? Next Thursday, it's Deb Watson.
Oh, yes.
Is going to teach us how to paint small furniture. So you don't want to miss that either.
And it's the same, I think it's the same login and the same password, right?
It is.
Okay.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much. I enjoyed this. I hope you did. I hope you learned something. And
You did.
yeah,
That was great.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very good.
Thank you.
when we can get back together again, come and join us at the Spudney Garden, and you'll learn all kinds of things like this.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night, Cheryl.
Good evening.